Hi there, I'm Jennifer Simmons with AIM, and welcome to another AIM video recap of what's happening in the Indiana State House during the 2023 legislative session. This was the third week of the session, and committee work is where most of the action is taking place right now. But a handful of bills we're working on have moved to the floor of the House and Senate, and joining me today is Jenna Knepper, AIM's Government Affairs Director. Jenna, thanks for joining once again for the update.
Thanks, Jennifer. Happy to be here. Happy it's Friday.
Yes, very much so. Well, it's a good segue. During these weeks, when I see on the schedule that we are double and triple booked with committee meetings where bills we're tracking are being heard right and left, I feel like it's necessary to start with a welfare check. Like, how are you doing? Maybe tell me a little bit about the pace and the speed with which everything's happening inside the State House this week, or was happening.
Yeah, generally doing pretty well. I mean, on Tuesday, we had a really busy day, which we talked about last week, but it was really in large part due to our positive legislative initiatives moving and getting heard in committees. And so overall, a good week. Grateful for Campbell and Chris, other members of our legislative team who helped testify on a number of issues, from residential TIF to outdoor refreshment areas. But over the next couple of weeks, as the committee reporting deadline looms large at the end of January, I think you'll see more and more committees scheduled with even more bills assigned to be heard.
Well, let's start. You kind of alluded to it on a positive note, so let's start there. We had an AIM initiative we have an AIM initiative to make it easier, especially in this period where municipalities are really competing with the private sector on any number of things, especially road and street building materials. We've covered this in our written legislative summary in previous weeks, but the bill now is being fairly well received. Would you cover the highlights of Senate Bill 317 and especially where it is on the calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, a credit to ILMCT and our members this is really a member driven issue. When AIM was seeking feedback from AIM members about what are some common sense fixes that we can pursue this session, they by and large suggested the language that is now in Senate Bill 317 that allows prepayments and deposits. And so the good news was last week it passed out of House or Senate local government 13-0. It was on the second reading calendar this week, which means it's eligible for amendments from the full body of the Senate. Only one amendment was offered, and that was from the bill author, Senator Andy Zay, who we've been working closely with. And essentially what his amendment does is it caps the total amount that a local unit of government can prepay or deposit at $2 million. This seems very reasonable. I don't think many communities will make a prepayment that large. But he wanted that as an additional guardrail. So that was passed by a voice vote yesterday with very little discussion. So now moving forward, the bill is eligible for third reading, where the full Senate will then vote on Senate Bill 317. If it passes the Senate, it'll be sent over to the House, where we'll deal with that in the second half starting in March. So for now, it's in a really good place. If any AIM members have an interest in this bill, certainly recommend them reaching out to their senators to encourage them to support it. But all in all, grateful to Senator Zay, who has helped champion this with the Senate leadership.
Great. Next thing I want to talk about is annexation. So last week I noted that in our many years of doing these video updates and AIM legislative summary in general, we probably covered TIF at least 50-60% of the time. So annexation, it's got to be more like 75% of the time, I would say. Jenna, let's do it again. What's happening relative to annexation at the State House?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 219 will look forward to anyone who has followed along with AIM each of the last, 5 to 7 sessions. It's a concept that Senator Boots used to champion that would end essentially municipally initiated annexations moving forward. So in order for a municipality to annex property, it'd have to be voluntary or super voluntary. Although Senator Boots retired, Senator Buck picked up that mantle. That bill passed out of Senate local government 6-4 and is now eligible for third reading. So there were no amendments offered on second reading. So this bill will go to the full Senate next week to be voted on. Members who are interested in annexation, I certainly encourage them to reach out to their legislators to talk about why this is an important tool for growth. Because I think, big picture, we know that this bill typically passes the Senate. The House hasn't generally given it a hearing or voted it out of local government, but knowing that the dynamics have changed, that the current chair of House Local Government introduced his own bill limiting municipal annexations, we would like to get some more no votes on this and to really make our case on the House side, because this conversation likely isn't going away, and long term it's something that AIM's going to have to continue to work on with the stakeholders.
Yeah, this is one of those that is really tough, because when we're going to grow for jobs, right? A lot of, if it's a company that really is going to bring in a lot of jobs, it generally needs a lot of space. Where is that? On the fringe, right in the outside of city limits, or maybe straddling, part inside, part outside. And if we're going to attract those jobs, we need to be able to grow and accommodate. So we hear jobs, and this can hinder that growth. On the other hand, we hear housing, we need housing. And where's that going to go? It's going to go where there is space. And sometimes that's on the outside, sometimes it's straddling. So it's really tough, because we get a receptive audience for some of these things at the State House, and sometimes they don't see the connection between annexation and a lot of other things they're telling us should be the priority.
You're exactly right. So I'm actually in Goshen right now. There is a Northern Indiana Mayor's Roundtable breakfast this morning, and one of the mayors in attendance talked about how they have a property that needs to be developed, but because of contiguity requirements, they can't annex it. And as a result, the business walked away because they need and depend on those city services. So I know annexation isn't always a popular topic of conversation, but it's an important one. You hit the nail on the head with its relation to economic development, housing, all of the things we need for growth.
Right. Well, housing is maybe moving in the right direction. You said to me earlier, there are a lot of good things happening relative to housing, but there are also some equally concerning bills out there. So maybe expand on that a little bit, since we've touched on housing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think anytime we talk about housing, there's just some natural tensions that occur between development and who's paying for growth and what. And so really, all in all, we were able to work out some of those big picture conversations with the Housing Task Force. So on the good news side, House Bill 1005 is the main bill that came out of the Housing Task Force, chaired by Representative Doug Miller and Senator Rogers. And what it does is it establishes a revolving loan fund for local units of government to apply for funds for development. Again, it's not a grant, but it is a loan fund. But within the revolving loan fund set up through the Indiana Finance Authority, the bill outlines kind of a checklist of things for the IFA to consider. And so if the community is going to apply for this loan for a specific project, say a neighborhood development, they will get extra points or extra consideration if they waive certain standards for that project. So if they have design standards in place, if they waive those for that project, that's a check mark in the right direction. If they promote increased density, maybe smaller lot size, or allow for ADUs in that development, they'll get extra checkpoints from the IFA within the application. So it's kind of a very prescriptive application outlined in House Bill 1005, but it meets kind of the overall point we've tried to make is, if you want to see these changes, incentivize them, allow local communities to assess with their constituents whether the need for housing kind of outweigh some of these standards, or whether constituents will want that in their community. So it's a very local conversation initiated by this application and loan process. So that's good news that that's moving in that direction. It is a House Republican caucus priority. And then another item that came out of the Housing Task Force and aligns with AIM's legislative initiatives is residential TIF and the expansion of that tool for all communities. So 2 bills were heard this week. That's really what kept us busy on Tuesday. House Bill 1081 is Representative Heine's bill, which is going to remove that 1% requirement. So when we talk about that, essentially only communities who have had less than 1% growth in their housing stock over 3 years can utilize residential TIF. And so what that means for, some of our smaller communities, if they've built 5 homes over 3 years, they can't use residential TIF as an incentive. And it's a lot of those communities who need the extra incentives for developers with cost of infrastructure being what it is. Developers are looking to units to work with them on how we fund that infrastructure. So that bill was held in the in-house local government. They plan to bring it back for potential amendments and vote on February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. And then Senate Bill 300 is Senator Rogers' bill, which was heard in Tax and Fiscal. Another bill we totally support. It also removes that 1% test for all communities. Also goes a step further and removes the requirement that school boards approve the use of residential TIF. We had a couple of mayors testify and support, one really specific to that provision as he's attempted to negotiate with his school boards. They've vetoed their residential TIF because they wanted $1 million for their turf and lights if they were going to approve the residential TIF. So we've seen this tension. And so for us and our communities, increased housing is a top priority. Most of our communities are working really well with their school boards, but that bill did pass out of Tax and Fiscal. I think the vote was 10-2. But with all good things, there's always other things to monitor. So we haven't talked about this yet, but House Bill 1030 comes to us from Representative Althoff, and it deals with registration of the registration fees associated with rental units. And what this bill does is it does allow a community to charge $10 instead of the maximum of $5 for rental units to register. But right now, there's a lot of communities will charge fees if the unit doesn't pay their registration fee. So this caps those fees. If a unit doesn't pay the registration fee within 30 to 90 days, they're capped at, I believe it's $50, and then that increases to $100 after those 90 days. So really want to point this out for any AIM members or community leaders whose fees might be above that, because it would be an additional cap. And we know in talking to Chairman May of House Local Government, this bill is going to get a hearing, not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. And then the other bill that's on our radar is House Bill 1575. This is a priority. We know of the Apartment Association and the Builders Association. It essentially creates a new building commission. Right now, the Department of Homeland Security and the Fire Prevention and Safety Commission adopt national standards and national codes. The Apartment Association and Builders Association have talked about how they're not moving at a quick enough pace. So this creates a new commission with them appointing some of those members to deal with some of those rate rules and regulations. And in it is section 18 of the bill would say that a local unit can't have an ordinance more stringent or more strict. But we have concerns if they're adopting standards that might be below what's already currently in place, or a national code that's currently in place. So it's just something to keep an eye on because safety is paramount for our members. And so want to see how that interacts with local ordinances. It's not scheduled for a hearing. We'll continue to talk to stakeholders about it. But it's certainly something we want to keep our eye on as we talk about housing this session.
Yeah, just backing up a little bit, and we probably need to wrap up soon. I don't want to belabor the point, but on the residential TIF, I'm just not sure there's a broad understanding about that those districts don't bring in the kind of funds that a quote unquote normal TIF district brings in. So residential TIF is not lucrative. Those are intended for targeted incentives to try to spur more housing and growth. Do you think there's just not an understanding of how those work among school boards?
Yeah, I would say there is a testimony from a couple of witnesses that, one person even called it a slush fund. It is far from that. When you run the numbers on residential TIF, sometimes it doesn't even make sense for a community to utilize the tool because the AV doesn't grow at a rapid enough pace to cover the cost of infrastructure. It really is a tool to pay for infrastructure. And so I think as we continue to work with school boards, I think there needs to be, continuing to work on that education and that understanding that one, AV is not a dollar for dollar amount. Like if you want to pass through, that's not going to equate to the numbers you're going to think it, but especially with residential TIF, the math is just tricky to make it work for a municipality as an incentive.
Right. Well, we'll keep at it. So I've noticed, just as we close, I think you've noticed that it seems like we're seeing a lot more AIM members at the State House this year, which, either advocating for or against, a bill that AIM is working on, coming in at our request, or they're here to work on a bill that's unique to their community. One that solves maybe a problem they're experiencing. So, and I know it's a welcome sight to see our members meeting with their legislators to help explain things on a granular level and continue really developing those relationships. But what kind of advice or requests do you have for municipal officials who are at the State House for one reason or another? What are some of the things where you coach them as they come in and out?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because it's, we will always want to ensure that we, as much as possible, can be on the same page with our members. If there's a bill that an AIM member is going to the State House to lobby on because they're passionate about, if we can be a resource and offer background information, a heads up that you're coming is really helpful, and we can help AIM members navigate any landmines, or even if they're coming to testify for the first time. Like we had a mayor this week who testified on residential TIF. It was his first time ever testifying. So questions about how do I sign in? Where do I go? We are more than happy to be a resource on all from the logistics to the policy to setting up the meetings. It's really helpful for us to be on the same team and helping on those local government issues.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Jenna, we'll sign off for this week. Thanks for the updates. And I'm going to give my same sign off that hopefully by the end of the legislative session, you all will be able to say it along with me. But at the bottom of your legislative summary is a bill tracking list where Jenna and her team are tracking hundreds and hundreds of bills that impact municipalities. Obviously, as the session goes along, that list will get a little smaller, but for now, please read the tracking list to make sure that you bring to our attention anything that is of grave concern to you that you haven't heard us update on either in the video or the written legislative summary. And of course, March 8th is the AIM legislative dinner here in Indianapolis at the Westin at 6:30 p.m. Please plan to join us for that. It is free for AIM municipal members and of course legislators. So please go on the website aimindiana.org and register so we can save you a seat. And with that, everyone have a great weekend and we'll see you next week.